Hey guys, I thought this was super interesting. First of all, I'm extremely excited that Alex O'Connor is talking about veganism again, especially with Peter Singer. These two gentlemen are the two people that converted me to veganism and that essentially turned me vegan. It was a speech from Alex O'Connor and it was Animal Liberation from Peter Singer. Those were the two sort of um, catalysts for me of veganism. So Peter Singer says something really interesting here. He describes himself as a flexible vegan, and the way he describes himself as a flexible vegan is how I describe myself as a vegan. So I'm wondering, am I a flexible vegan rather than just a vegan? So
Instagram post, I remember reading that you had, I think this was a quote from your book, Why Vegan, or the introduction to it, that you described yourself as a flexible vegan. Could you tell us a bit about what that means?
Yeah, sure. It means that when I have the opportunity to eat vegan, that is what I will do. But there may be occasions. I don't think it's vital to be hardline in every circumstances. And sometimes, for example, uh, if you don't eat something that is prepared, maybe.
I should clarify real quick. So I think when Peter says hard lines, and I think Peter would agree with me on this. You want to stay hard line to your principles, to so me and Peter have similar ethical. We're both utilitarians, so we care about consequences, right? So whatever we do, whatever brings about the best consequences. So we're not going to be hard lined as far as like which item has animal products in it, but more so we're hard lined about which item is going to have foreseeable better consequences.
It will be wasted and there will be no other consequences. So, for example, you get on a plane and they've mixed up your order for a vegan meal. It happens, and they put something else in front of you. Now, if it was meat, I wouldn't want to eat it anyway. But it might be something that's not vegan, but is got some dairy or something like that in it. And it's clear, they've served it to you. They're just going to throw it away if you don't eat it. I don't really see a problem about eating that. So that's one way in which I'm flexible. I'm also, I guess, strictly speaking, not vegan because what I'm concerned about, as far as animals are an issue, is, again, as we've been talking about, their capacity to suffer. And I'm not convinced that everything that is described by zoologists as an animal is capable of suffering. I would say an example might be an oyster. I discussed this in Animal Liberation Now. I sort of revisit the discussion I had in the original edition of Animal Liberation, and I continue to think, and there's support for this, that it's very unlikely that oysters are capable of suffering. Um, Also, oysters actually.
Yeah, I also think even if they do suffer, I feel like it's not enough to really care, and I feel like the pleasure that we gain out of it is actually would probably be superior to the suffering that they would go through, especially because of a lot of the nutrients that vegans tend to miss out on come from oysters. So
Oyster farming serves a positive environmental purpose because oysters clean the water. So oyster farming in waters that are um, otherwise might become polluted in some ways.
that's a very good point because a lot of people will use farming oysters as like a justification, like saying that it's an environmental harm, but apparently that might not be the case.
Will be performing a service. Uh, so I don't see a problem about eating oysters if you want to eat oysters. It's not something that I eat very often, but I wouldn't really object to that. And I wouldn't say, no, I'm a vegan, I can't eat an oyster because it's an animal, even if I believe that it doesn't suffer and that environmentally it's just as good or better to eat oysters than to eat some grains or other plant products.
Yeah, I know a lot of vegans who have no problem eating animal products that are about to go to waste. Again, there's some consideration that we're maybe seeing animals and animal products as food here in a way that is if not harmful, then wrong. But of course, as a consequentialist, that probably wouldn't apply to you. And in the case of oysters, we're essentially offering a justification that there is no suffering involved. But I've heard you also say that you will eat free range eggs, and I had a look to see if I could find some other quotes, and I found something from 2006. So I don't know if your views are still the same, but in an interview with The Vegan, you said you could imagine a world in which people mostly eat plant-based foods, but occasionally treat themselves to the luxury of free-range eggs, or possibly even meat from animals who live good lives under conditions natural for their species, and are then humanely killed on the farm. That's the quote that jumped out of me, and I think the words there, humanely killed, are seen by many, if that killing is unnecessary, as a contradiction in terms. Could you explain what you mean by that as well?
Yeah, I know. I would still hold those views that you just quoted. So, in terms of the free-range eggs, I think that of all the animal products that are available commercially, they're probably the least harmful ones, because, and I'm talking about a genuine free-range farm where the animals are outside, where they have a grass run. They're not dense. They're not stocked so densely that the grass gets killed, which is one sign that you've got too many chickens on your.
Yes, just for the sake of the audience, I presume you're not talking here about just eggs that are labeled free range by the supermarket, but actually free range eggs, because that will be one of the criticisms I think you'll receive there, is that free range eggs aren't in fact free range. You're talking about actually free range eggs. What would be the conditions there for the kind of free range conditions that you think would make it acceptable to eat the eggs?
So we have eggs in I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia. We have eggs in Australia, particularly that you're likely to get from stores that stock more organic produce, but you get them in some supermarkets, where you're told how many hens there are per hectare. Obviously you might want to check that information. Sometimes you can call the farm and say, can I visit? I'd like to see how your hens are kept. But some of them say, let's say, have 500 hens per hectare. That's a low stocking density. That's low enough for the grass to remain healthy, for there still to be, things to eat that the hens find. It's not just like packed dirt or anything like that. There's not really interesting. So I think that's a reasonable sort of stocking density. In fact, you could debate how far you would go. I don't know. You could maybe go to 1,000 hens per hectare.
Yeah, real quick. I imagine a lot of vegans are would be very angry about this, because I can see them now, the mob coming in and calling Peter Singer here a welfarist and not a vegan. He's a welfarist. And sure, I guess, but the thing is, I don't know if I have any objections to this. Like, it seems like if we're giving them happy lives. Anyways, let's continue watching.
So I think that's the kind of information that you need to judge if these are what I would consider genuinely free range. And you would want to know, of course, that the birds are able to go outside during daylight hours in all normal weather. Maybe there's some, depending where in the world you are, maybe you might keep them in blizzard conditions or something of that sort. But generally, hens can decide for themselves when they want to go out, as long as they have shelter and access to the outdoors. They'll decide for themselves. So that's the kind of free-range eggs that I'm talking about. And the other thing to say about free-range chickens and eggs, as distinct from, say, free-range or grass-fed beef, is that grass-fed beef is disastrous from a climate change point of view. The methane emissions are high. In fact, they're actually higher in grass-fed beef than they are in grain-fed beef, because it takes longer for the animal to put on weight, which is why they're commercially usually fed on grain. But with laying hens, that's not an issue. They don't produce methane. So I think that's why I say, if you do want to eat animal products and you want to get them, commercially, you can't produce them by yourself, you're not living on land, then finding a supplier of bona fide free-range eggs, I think is something that can be defended.
Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing. I agree with all three issues that Peter brings up: the airplane food, oysters, and then the free range. Of course, there are practical issues, like especially when it comes to the free range. It's like, oftentimes you're still supporting the industry that like grinds up baby chicks, but it's not like a necessary part of the industry, right? Like I don't, I, I think even though you may be using them as like, it could technically be a rights violation, right? But I have the same moral framework essentially as Peter Singer does, right? Where we care about consequences, and if the consequences of treating uh, uh, um, these chickens as products actually gives them sort of maybe a better life than they would have had, maybe they maybe would not have existed, and if they can, yeah, walk around on a happy farm and you just take a couple eggs here and there. I don't know, man. That's a really hard. It's hard to disagree with that, at least from my perspective. So I'm wondering if because as he's describing himself as a flexible vegan, it's just I agree with everything he says. When I call myself a vegan, should I call myself a flexible vegan instead?
And the other thing that I would say about this, which also goes back to your point about the humanely killed animals that are raised, is there's a deeper philosophical question here. And when people say, well, you shouldn't be killing this animal, and incidentally, the hens on free-range farms will generally be killed when they stop laying eggs or when their rate of laying eggs declines. And also, of course, the male chicks of these varieties of hens who lay eggs well are not going to be raised for meat. They're going to be killed as chicks. Although there is work going on in Europe now to sex the eggs so that you don't get male chicks of the laying breeds. I think in France and Germany they've actually...
Yeah, exactly. There's maybe some practical reasons to be opposed to it, but I don't see any like actual philosophical, like moral reasons.
Laws requiring that to be phased in now. I'm not sure what the deadline is, but I think it's pretty soon. So, that would avoid that problem. But the deeper philosophical problem here is, say, these hens, let's say they do have good lives. Let's just take that as accepted. You look at them, on the whole, they have good lives. They have shorter lives than they would have if they lived out their life in full. Is it a harm to them to bring them into existence, to have those good lives for a certain period of time, and then to be killed in a way that they suffer no pain from? They have no anticipation of being killed. They're killed very quickly.
Yeah, there's an issue. You're depriving them of future pleasure. I think yeah, you don't end their lives early. You let them live out their lives, and then you end them like you would with a dog when there's assuming old age, sick, where they're continuing existing would be more suffering than ending, and I take that in the human context too.
Quickly, and there's no pain. So, and that's what I mean by humanely killed, by the way. And I think that can happen. Again, it doesn't happen standardly at commercial slaughterhouses, but it can happen. And these again, I referred to Parfitt a moment earlier, but this is a different and perhaps more famous problem that Parfitt raises about population ethics. Is it good that there be more people in existence if the total amount of happiness is greater, although the average is a little less, as long as they still have positive lives? That's a problem which I don't think anybody has given a satisfactory answer to, and Parfitt sadly died without being able to give a satisfactory answer to it himself. So, given how
Anyways, but yeah, this is really interesting to me. It's like, should I change what I call myself? If what I call myself as a vegan is the exact same, or almost the exact same, as what Peter Singer calls himself as a flexible vegan. So this is really interesting to me. Um, yeah, I'll have to ponder that. And also, I'm just super glad that these two are talking. It just makes my day. It's awesome. And adios.